Hey there, Guilty Gamers! Welcome to the first episode of Facts, Theories, and Lore. My name is Claire, and this series is going to be used to introduce ideas and theories about various fantasy elements. From how wizards cast magic to potential uses for alchemy, I'll be covering it all, maybe even a few superheroes along the way. And, for my first episode, I'll be covering one of my favorite topics of all time, dragons. You know, those scaly, fire-breathing monsters. You've killed them, you've ridden them, but have you ever thought about what makes them work? Let's dive into some thoughts. First off, I'd like to talk about the body structure of these scaly guys. When you hear dragon, one of two things comes into mind. Either the ones with 2 wings, 4 legs, and basically look like flying dinosaurs, or there's the serpent-like ones from the Orient, closer to Shenron from Dragon Ball Z. I'll talk about those types later. For now, let's discuss Western dragons. In terms of size, dragons are always usually depicted as being rather large. This works out since the muscular structure needed would have to be large enough to both flap wings and control 4 separate legs. While there are depictions of dragons as having only 4 limbs, with the 4 limbs and wings being arms, such as Paarthurnax from Skyrim, the same theory applies. And, as size goes to show, they are massive. Even Toothless from How to Train Your Dragon is relatively large, but what about the smaller dragons? For this one, let's take a bird-like approach. It's basically common knowledge that bird bones are partially hollow. And as far as anyone knows, reptilian bones are not hollow, but for the sake of a theory, let's work with small dragons having hollow bones. This would allow for smaller bodies to gain lift on air currents instead of expending too much energy trying to keep themselves aloft. So bird-like bones in smaller dragon species would be completely feasible as a basis. Speaking of energy, how do these guys stay alive? Are they cold-blooded like reptiles, or because of flight do they need warm blood to keep their internals at a decent temperature, similar to birds or bats? This is honestly the more likely scenario, and it would also put dragons as a sort of bird-reptile hybrid. It also works with the fire-breathing aspect, what with the warmth and all. For aging, there's not much to say about dragons. Always being depicted as living for hundreds of years, if not thousands, there's a reason why they wouldn't be depicted as nigh immortal. And since most canon lore is that they hatch from eggs, that also fits in with the bird-reptile hybrid theory. And now, onto the fun part of the theory, fire. It's hot, it's useful, and dragons can spit it like a line. Okay, that was bad, I'm sorry. The most leading theory I have on fire breath deals with snakes, specifically spitting cobras. Since they can indeed spit venom, no matter the distance, it's entirely possible that dragons have a similar gland in their heads or throats that releases a similar but highly flammable substance. Spit venom, spark, and fire. Another possible source of flammable substance could be methane, or, in other words, farts. Dragons could possibly hold methane in a specialized pouch in their insides, and then breathe it up and ignite it in that way. More similar to how you could use an aerosol can and a lighter to create a flamethrower. Please do not do that at home. But how do you get that spark? I have 2 major theories about that. The first one deals with a specialized flint-like covered tongue. A simple flick of the tongue against itself or the roof of the mouth, which would be covered in a similar substance, would produce a spark. Another theory is clacking teeth together. If bone is strong enough, or if teeth are coated in a similar flint material, a simple quick bite of the mouth would produce enough of a spark to ignite any flammable substance. Let's take to the skies now, and figure out how these guys could fly. Earlier I talked about how smaller dragons could remain airborne, but what about the larger guys? Or how do they even take off? First, it seems relatively simple. Flap flap, right? But if you take a closer look as to how birds and bats fly, it becomes apparent that there's a lot more needed than just up and down. Wings move in a circular motion to gain lift and flap at somewhat of an angle to maintain flight. Given this, it's totally possible that dragons could fly, given that they can replace the energy they would expend flying. The wingspan would also have to be roughly equal to the total length of the creature, however, meaning that the shadow that you see on the ground as they fly over you would be immense. And, as seen with Toothless in How to Train Your Dragon, some dragons can't fly without complete tails. Tail fins would allow for much needed stability and control mid-air. Since all of Western culture knows of the standard dragon with 4 legs, 2 wings, and a tail, let's talk about the Eastern or the Oriental dragon now. I won't get into details as to how they work into culture. This is specifically a biological foray. Being that they have no wings, it's always been a curiosity of mine as to how they fly. My favorite theory is that they're similar to gliding snakes, and they undulate their bodies to ride air currents, seeming to make them fly. And given that culture states they live on mountains, they could ride air currents from one mountain to another, instead of one tree to another. There are forms of dragons in other cultures, or what would basically equate to a dragon, the most notable being the Quetzalcoatl in Central American cultures. Described as a feathered and winged serpent, this definitely matches my earlier theory on the bird-reptile hybrids. Perhaps this species of dragon simply evolved to have feathers to blend in with the rainforest? The first and only real-world occurrence of a dragon is in the form of the famed Komodo dragon. Existing in a fairly remote part of the Indonesian islands, this big brute is a member of the monitor lizard family. They eat mostly carrion and carcasses, but will hunt when the need arises. And guess what? It's venomous. And its saliva contains bacteria that slowly breaks down meat. Their tongues are also snake-like, meaning long and flexible. With how strange these guys already are, it's not much of a stretch to make them fly and breathe fire. As for dragons in popular culture nowadays, it's hard to look around and not see one somewhere. Of course, there's always the video games like Skyrim or Drakengard that feature killing and riding dragons respectively. Several shows and movies also feature dragons, but few try to explain the full hows and whys as to how the big scaly guys work. Tabletop games like Dungeons & Dragons leave it up to the players to determine how dragons work, while giving base guidelines. And don't even get me started on some of the other types that D&D allows, like blue dragons that breathe lightning. Ugh. In conclusion, it seems totally feasible that dragons could exist in reality, but I'll leave it all up to you guys. What do you think? Do you have any other theories about flying scaly fire breathers? Leave your ideas in the comments below. If you have any other theories, leave those down there as well. My name is Claire, your Guilty Gamer, and I'll see you all next time on FTL.